Then Bojan Milovic. Eldin Šarić was next, followed by Stjepan Vukojević and Adnan Kržić. All 5 men disappeared near the same remote stretch of forest on the edge of Sarajevo, without a sound, without a trace. At first, their names were just headlines on missing posters. But when a severed hand surfaced in the spring melt, it marked the beginning of a discovery so dark, it would shake Bosnia to its core. Beneath the roots of Mount Trebević, investigators uncovered a secret bunker, hours of silent footage, and evidence of a twisted ritual, one that turned humans into prey. This is the story of the human hunters of Sarajevo. Sarajevo, a city once torn apart by war, had slowly begun to rebuild itself. Wounds had not completely healed, but life had returned to the streets. Cafes were full, trams rolled through the heart of the city, and laughter echoed again in the hills that once echoed with gunfire. But in the winter of 2011, something began to shift. A quiet unease crept in, not through violence, but through silence. People were disappearing. It started with a taxi driver named Haris Jebo. He was well known in the Dobrinja neighborhood, always working late and chatting with his regular passengers. One night, he picked up a fare near the edge of the city, close to the wooded trails of Mount Trebević. He never returned. His cab was later found parked near a dirt path, keys still in the ignition, driver's door wide open. Police assumed he had wandered off or been robbed, but there was no sign of struggle, no blood, and no belongings missing. His phone was gone, but that was not unusual. Haris became just another face on a missing poster. 2 weeks later, a high school history teacher named Bojan Milovic vanished after leaving an evening staff meeting. He had been walking to his car, which was parked in the same area, near the edge of the forest. His car, too, was found abandoned, this time with the door locked and his briefcase still inside. Friends described him as quiet and methodical, not the type to disappear on a whim. Then came the third, a mechanic named Eldin Šarić. His wife reported him missing after he failed to come home from work. A co-worker later mentioned that Eldin had talked about meeting someone up the hill to sell old car parts. His last known location was traced to a narrow road leading toward the mountain. That was all investigators could find. 3 men missing in less than 6 weeks, all taken from roughly the same area. Yet still, police hesitated to connect the cases. They combed the forest, sent dogs into the underbrush, even brought in drones to search from above. But Mount Trebević was dense and unforgiving. The mountain had secrets, and it wasn't ready to give them up. Locals began whispering. Some said it was just bad luck. Others recalled wartime stories about hidden bunkers, rogue soldiers who never surrendered, and strange figures seen at night. The forest had always been a place where things vanished, but this time the fear felt different, colder, calculated. When a 4th man, a retired soldier named Stjepan Vukojević, disappeared, the whispers turned into quiet panic. Stjepan had seen war up close. He wasn't someone who frightened easily, yet he too was taken without a trace, his car found near the same winding trail as the others. Still, no bodies, no suspects, no pattern the police were willing to admit. But Sarajevo knew something was wrong. The city had seen death in many forms, but never like this. These weren't random tragedies, they were warnings. And soon, the true terror would be uncovered. Spring brought no relief. The snow melted, revealing the forest floor beneath Mount Trebević, but not the answers that investigators were hoping for. The city remained tense. 4 men were gone, all taken within a short span of time, all from the same eerie stretch of woodland. Rumors had spread beyond Sarajevo. Journalists began asking questions, but police remained silent. There was no official connection between the disappearances, at least not yet. But everything changed on May 12th, when a hiker stumbled upon something grotesque. Mira Bielica, an experienced mountaineer, had taken a detour from the marked trail to photograph a rare species of orchid rumoured to grow near an old stone bridge. She wandered off the path, climbed down a mossy ravine, and noticed a strange object half buried in the mud by a creek bed. At first, she thought it was a mannequin's hand, pale, weathered, and stiff. But as she got closer, the smell hit her. It was unmistakable. She backed away and called the police, trembling as she tried to remember the exact route she'd taken. Forensics arrived quickly and confirmed the obvious. The hand was human. DNA analysis would take weeks, but the preliminary results suggested it belonged to Haris Jebo, the missing taxi driver. It was decomposed, but not entirely skeletal, suggesting it had been exposed to the elements for no more than 2 months. There were no tool marks, no signs of a wild animal attack. Just clean, unnatural separation at the wrist. Search teams flooded the area. They found more, a patch of disturbed soil behind a collapsed stone chapel, barely visible beneath vines, and fallen branches. Digging revealed something far more disturbing than anyone expected. A hidden shaft leading down into the earth. The entrance was reinforced with old concrete, overgrown but intact. The structure had no doors, only a steel hatch sealed with rusted chains. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Flashlights revealed a narrow staircase descending into blackness. At the bottom was a hallway, just wide enough for a single person to pass through. The walls were covered in moisture and mold. The first room was empty. Just a mattress, a bucket, and dried bloodstains on the floor. Then came another room, this one lined with soundproofing foam and crude restraints bolted to the walls. Rusted chains hung from the ceiling. Investigators stepped lightly, horrified at what they were seeing. The final room was different. It looked almost like a command center, if such a term could be used in a place like this. There was a folding table with a cracked laptop, a pile of disposable gloves, and a wall plastered with Polaroid photos. Dozens of them. Each showed one of the missing men, some bound, some blindfolded, others appearing drugged or unconscious. In each photo, the subject seemed to be inside the very bunker the police were now standing in, but there were no dates, no names, no blood visible, just fear frozen in time. The discovery confirmed what no one wanted to believe. The disappearances weren't accidents. The victims had been brought here, held, photographed, possibly tortured, but the bunker was empty. No bodies, no killers, only the smell of rot and the chilling knowledge that something deeply organized was behind it all. The footage was grainy, silent, and sickening. It was discovered a week after the bunker's unveiling, hidden inside a false panel behind the bunker's control room. Investigators found 3 external hard drives, dusty and wrapped in plastic. It took digital forensic teams days to recover the files. What they found would shift the investigation from grim speculation to undeniable horror. The videos, dozens of them, were all time-stamped between 2009 and 2011. Each opened with the same structure, a man standing in the center of a forest clearing, often disoriented, sometimes limping or bleeding. The camera, always set far enough away to keep the videographer hidden, slowly zoomed in on the victim. There was no sound, but the fear was unmistakable. The men weren't being held, they were being watched, hunted. In one video, a figure staggered through the trees, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. His hands were bound in front of him with cable ties, and his shirt was torn. A second figure, masked and dressed in dark clothing, appeared behind him in the distance, walking calmly with a crossbow slung over his shoulder. There was no rush, no shouting, no chaos. It was methodical. Another clip showed a man crawling through a shallow stream as two masked individuals watched from the ridge above. They didn't intervene. They waited. When the man tried to climb the bank, he slipped, then froze as a small projectile, possibly a bolt, whizzed past his head and lodged into a tree. The game wasn't to kill immediately. It was to terrorize. In total, the files contained footage of 6 separate hunts, each lasting between 30 minutes to 2 hours. Some victims managed to hide for a while. One climbed a tree and stayed, motionless, until nightfall. The camera cut away before any outcome was shown. Another was seen running into an open field before collapsing. A figure approached, knelt beside him, and placed a hand on his shoulder. Then the screen faded to black. The final video differed from the others. It opened inside the bunker. The camera was handheld, shaky. It moved down the hallway, past the blood-stained walls, and entered the control room. A masked person turned the camera on themselves for just a second. The face was covered, but the eyes, cold, alert, focused, were burned into the minds of every investigator who watched it. The camera then panned across a wall where a list was scrawled in red ink. It had 7 names. 5 were known victims. 2 were unknown. Authorities concluded that the victims had been abducted, taken to the bunker, held for several days, then released into the forest for sport. It was ritualized, structured, and repeated. The killers weren't improvising. They were following a process. These weren't random acts of violence. They were organized human hunts, carried out for pleasure or perhaps something darker. The forest wasn't just a hiding place. It was an arena. The hunters filmed their victims not just to document the act, but to relive it. Again and again. What haunted investigators most was the realization that someone had recorded it all and might be watching still. The deeper investigators dug into the origin of the bunker and the horrifying footage, the clearer it became that the crimes had been meticulously planned over a long period of time. The remote location, the reinforced structure, and the advanced camera setups all pointed to someone with military knowledge, access to supplies, and the discipline to carry out such atrocities without leaving obvious traces. That's when the name Trail Finders of Trebovich surfaced, an old hiking club that had dissolved nearly a decade earlier. On the surface, it had seemed harmless, even wholesome, but its roster would tell a different story. Founded in the early 2000s by war veterans, the group had been created with the goal of promoting recovery through outdoor survival training. Most of its members were former soldiers, many of whom had served during the siege of Sarajevo. They trained in orienteering, bushcraft, and marksmanship, often taking long treks into the wooded areas around the mountain. But in 2004, without explanation, the club shut down. The members scattered. Some left the country. Some died under unusual circumstances. Only one core member still lived in Sarajevo. His name was Emir Kadic, a decorated veteran, a respected local entrepreneur, and the founder of a popular real estate company. On the surface, he was untouchable. He donated to veteran causes, funded community centers, and often spoke on television about national pride and reconciliation. But behind the polished image was a man with a carefully hidden past. When police quietly began monitoring his movements, they noticed something strange. Emir frequently disappeared for days at a time, often claiming to be at business retreats or remote cabin stays. GPS data pulled from an old company vehicle placed him in the vicinity of the bunker multiple times over the previous 5 years. That alone wasn't enough to issue an arrest warrant. But when authorities searched property records, they discovered that a remote lodge near the base of Mount Trebovich, technically owned by a shell company, was in fact registered to Emir's wife. The lodge was less than 2 kilometers from the bunker. Armed with a search warrant, police raided the property. Inside, everything looked normal, until they entered a locked basement room. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Hidden behind false walls were shelves stacked with hunting gear, thermal goggles, animal traps, military-grade boots, ropes, and syringes. There was a freezer with several human teeth stored in bags, each labelled with initials. A laptop found in the room had been wiped clean, but not before technicians recovered fragments of encrypted files that matched the footage found in the bunker. In the crawl space beneath the floor, officers discovered a metal box. Inside were blood-stained watches, wallets, a pair of eyeglasses, and a handwritten ledger. The entries were brief and coded, but repeated symbols suggested a list of hunts, outcomes, and victim details. The last entry was dated just 2 weeks before the raid, but Emir was gone. His car was found abandoned near a trailhead, the engine still warm, no sign of a struggle. A witness later claimed to have seen a man matching his description heading toward the old war tunnels, forgotten paths that crisscross beneath Sarajevo, some still unexplored. He had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only proof of something far darker than anyone had imagined. The silence that followed Emir Kadić's disappearance was louder than any of the gunshots or screams caught on tape. The public, now aware of the horrors beneath Mount Trebovich, demanded answers. News outlets across Europe ran the story for weeks. The Sarajevo huntsman, they called him. Online communities dissected every image, every name, every blurry still from the recovered videos. But the case, in many ways, had already reached its end. Emir was gone, and without him, so were the chances of full justice. Interpol issued a red notice. Border alerts were triggered across the Balkans. Bosnia's intelligence service swept the underground tunnel systems, many of which had been sealed off or collapsed after the war. In one, they found a freshly opened passage. A discarded military rucksack lay beside an unused flare and a half-eaten food ration. But there were no footsteps beyond that point, just a caved-in corridor that dropped into darkness. Some believed Emir had died trying to escape. Others weren't so sure. In the months that followed, strange things continued to happen. Local hikers reported hearing distant, unnatural noises in the forest, metal clanging in places where no one had lived for decades. Others claimed to see lights deep in the woods at night, flickering like lanterns, then vanishing. One man, an amateur photographer, captured an image of a figure standing motionless on a ridge at sunset. The figure wore a dark jacket and a balaclava. Police investigated, but found nothing. The photo was dismissed as a hoax. Still, it circulated widely online. The bunker was sealed. Authorities filled it with concrete and chained off the entrance. The lodge was burned down in an accidental fire just weeks after the search. No charges were filed, no arrests made. There were whispers that others may have been involved. Other members of the Trailfinders group who had disappeared or conveniently died. But without hard evidence, the case slowly cooled. A public memorial was held for the confirmed victims. Their families attended, but no bodies were ever fully recovered. Over time, the story became a ghost tale, told in fragments to warn curious tourists and late-night hikers. Sarajevo, a city that had endured war, siege, and loss, now bore the legacy of something more elusive, an evil that had no clear motive, no demands, no manifesto, just a thirst to hunt. Years later, in 2019, a private security firm conducting training exercises stumbled across a trail camera nailed high into a tree. It wasn't theirs. The camera was modern, motion activated, and still functional. When investigators reviewed the memory card, they found hundreds of images: wildlife, hikers, the occasional animal carcass. But one image stood out. It showed 3 people walking single file through the woods. The person in the middle had their hands bound. The image was time-stamped just 4 weeks prior. No one recognized the faces. No one came forward. Police launched another search, but nothing was found. To this day, the woods of Mount Trebovich remain closed to the public after dark. No new victims have been confirmed. But the forest remembers. The trees, once witnesses, remain silent. And somewhere, perhaps in a bunker no one has yet found, the hunt may still be waiting to begin again.